I mean, who knows how many thousands of images we look at every day just through Instagram. Like on YouTube, it's like you watch, like listen to music, like there's like 6 ads, and so then I'd like people ideally to be able to spend time with my paintings. And so the figures, I think, open up this way to sit with a potential narrative or sit with a mystery for a while. And that just, I hope, will slow you down. I mean, for me too, like that slows me down, and spending time with that is fruitful just because it seems to be somewhat of like a, not a reaction, but like I'd like to kind of make something that isn't just piling on top of this like massive library of lost images that is
Yeah.
accumulating online.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I think another successful tool that you use is like this, the figures aren't ever just static, they're not just like standing there. They almost have like this kind of anonymous but like strange movement in their posture, and oftentimes they're shadows or footsteps or a reflection in a mirror or somebody else through a window. And I think that does, like you said, it opens up the narrative, and there's like a melancholic mystery in it as well that is playful um and yeah, again, peaceful and just like a really nice pause. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have talked about that in the past, where you're kind of interested in being aware of your individual consciousness, and then the outer maybe shared or universal consciousness, and fluctuating between the both, and how that's kind of informed your work in some ways, or just like where you are at as an individual.
Yeah, so I think that that kind of idea of the perspective of on the one hand having like a consciousness that's very self-centered and like kind of concerned with like day-to-day needs of like food, and then career, like just like basic responsibilities, I feel like that can easily become very consuming. And I mean, it's valid that that's consuming, but I also want to balance that with moments that are a little bit more transcendental, is
Hmm.
maybe the word. Which is just like I think like a maybe a reminder that when you're around nature, I think being reminded of your size like
Yeah.
in comparison to a tree is like very useful in terms of like reducing those sort of like self obsessions that I think that we're all kind of subjected to, especially, I mean, I think a sign is if you think that you're not experiencing those things, then you're just not aware of them.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, like I think I used to maybe think like, oh, like I'm not self-centered. And then like you sit with yourself for a minute and then you really quickly realize like how much you think about yourself. Like, I mean, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing, like it's not always in a selfish way. But either way, I think that once I had that realization when I was like, I don't know, maybe like early 20s, I was like, oh, how can I kind of like negate this a little bit? And I think that one being in nature, and then in a sense, even like the act of painting is kind of that for me, because it's like I'm so focused on something else that I definitely am not, it's like I could be thinking about like what like homework that I have to do or like jobs, but the painting makes me constantly return to the painting. Like my attention, like all these other thoughts, like they kind of come in and they go out quite quickly.
Yeah.
And I think potentially that's why the figures in my paintings like are always quite small in relationship to the rooms that they're in. Because I think that although it's kind of an unsettling feeling, feeling small in relation to other things is actually one of the more beneficial experiences we can have.
Yeah.
Just because it really does provide like a different perspective from most other things.
Yeah.
Even in Chicago now, the skyscrapers can provide that to a certain extent. I mean, if you're at the bottom of one and you look up and I mean, that's taller than a tree, and it
I mean, the
really,
lake for one.
yeah, the lake too, yeah. I think that those are the moments that I'd rather I'm personally trying to dwell in, because I think that the rest of my life is it kind of compels us to stay in that mindset of approaching things from the aspect of like where we want to go and what we're doing, and it's very kind of time based and career based, and that's all fine. Like there's like absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I've noticed that that can create imbalance. And with painting, like my painting practice is really to kind of help rectify that in my own life, not necessarily in other people's lives, because I think that that's maybe too strong a claim to make. It's that would be a little bit uh foolhardy. But I think that cultivating those own moments in my own life is something that I find useful with
Yeah.
painting.
And it's great to see how location has kind of changed the compositions of your work. Like from your landscapes, now you're in Chicago, you are actually painting more cityscapes. And it's, to what you were saying, you're still placing yourself like in these spaces where you have those experiences of how small you are in relation to like um the bigger things in life. And uh can you talk a little bit more about how is it different for you to paint this new metropolis that you've been living in?
Yeah, I mean, I think with some of the cityscapes, there's maybe a touch more melancholy. Also, 'cause in those paintings, I also remove the figures, and so I would leave like a handbag or a bed or like an empty
Yeah.
couch that kind of became these stand-ins. And I mean, I think potentially that melancholy was more. Maybe I prefer nature for those experiences, but I think that in the city, it feels a little bit more desolate
Mm,
potentially, especially I think Chicago in the winter. I think those are the closest to like COVID paintings that I've made. I mean, everyone's had like enough of those, I know, but I think that those were kind of being in Chicago for a year straight, like kind of like right through kind of like the heart of the pandemic. Really, it definitely felt very empty. And I think the melancholy and like the emptiness that I was exploring kind of resulted from that.
yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily like a negative melancholy. Like I think that there's something that's like romantic about that emptiness for me. And there's something exciting about it. And that
Yeah.
was kind of this space that I was really interested in inhabiting at the moment. And then in some strange ways too, the city paintings, I was looking at also like skyscrapers in LA as well. Like I was definitely influenced by like the colors of Chicago and kind of like the idea, like the sunsets that I would see there. But the building shapes, I think, were very reminiscent of LA. I grew up like in like Echo Park in LA,
Right.
and so a lot of hills, and so I'd always be looking out over at cities. And in a sense, like having those kind of like I miss the hills
Yeah.
in Chicago since it was so flat. And so my way to kind of have these perspectives of looking down at things was through buildings.
Right.
And that really, I think, kind of allowed me to explore those spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I lived in Chicago for a while, and there is that when you're walking, you know, into the loop, it's just like slowly and slowly you're kind of getting hidden behind these just like shadows, and you don't have much perspective. So I like how you know, have put yourself like up at an angle or looking down. I think that is that there's like joy in that. There is like a little bit of melancholy, but I think like you said, your melancholy is kind of playful, and there's like joy in it in some ways, where it's not just like, oh, I'm stuck here. It's like a fluid space that has a little bit of mystery, it has a little um bit of like a little bit of loneliness, but not too much, where it's like there was somebody here. I love the piece with the bag on the chair. There was somebody here. It doesn't like I'm not just by myself in this room with a couch. Like there someone existed. And I think that's really fun.
Yeah, I think that too, going back to like the melancholy and stuff, I think that those emotions are almost like the word is often taken at face value and not often explored in its nuance. And that often leads, I think, to people just thinking like if you use like the word melancholy to describe someone's paintings before, I think like often the connotations are like sad or like unhappy. Like it's not always like a, I mean, there's like definitely some sweetness associated with the word, but I think in general they're kind of associated more with the sadness.
Yeah.
And I don't like fully subscribe to that definition of the word, even though it can be valid. I think that it's more of like a nuanced situation, and like I would prefer to think it as like a bittersweetness, and I think that's kind of like, to me, there's like a honesty in things that are bittersweet
Yeah.
because it seems like both sides of like the coin are packed into one object, which I appreciate. Like it doesn't have like unrealistic highs and it also doesn't have unrealistic lows. It kind of is somewhere, it's in this middle ground. And that
Yeah.
middle ground is something I'm very interested in kind of staying in. Like I don't want to ever overly give in to kind of like happiness or sadness in a sense. Like I think that both of those extremes are, exciting, but I don't necessarily want to pursue either one fully. I think that, like paintings that are like too sad, I have a hard time looking at. And then paintings that are too happy, I also kind of find equally
Yeah.
unappealing.
I mean, it makes sense